8. The Atlanta Ripper. Between 1911 and 1912, an unidentified serial killer nicknamed the Atlanta Ripper abducted and killed an estimated 15 to 20 women around the Atlanta area. He targeted only attractive African American and biracial women from poorer communities, including his first known victim, Belle Walker, who was found brutally killed just 25 yards, 22.86 meters from her home. As word of Belle's death spread, local communities became terrified. Over the course of just a few weeks, the Atlanta Ripper claimed at least 7 more victims that we know of. By then, women who feared they might be targeted were afraid to even go out at night and even refused to go to their jobs if they had a night shift, and understandably so. Nearly all the killer's victims were described as neatly dressed, good-looking, and educated, showing an obvious pattern of who his targets were. The murders were all committed with a knife or some other type of sharp object, and were particularly gruesome in nature, hence the Ripper's nickname. He nearly decapitated one poor victim named Lena Sharp. Lena's 20-year-old daughter, Emma Lou, who was also attacked but survived, managed to get a glimpse of the Atlanta Ripper during the attack. Emma was searching for her mother when she crossed paths with them, who she later described as a large, neatly dressed African-American man. He asked her how she was doing and blocked her path when she tried to move past him. The man stabbed Emma in the back, but luckily she got away and was able to report the encounter to the authorities after getting treated. 6 different suspects were named during the search for the killer, but no arrests were ever made, and the Atlanta Ripper was never officially identified. It's believed he may have killed more than the 15 victims, but it hasn't been proven that he was responsible for several other murders that happened during his reign of terror. To this day, no one knows what happened to the infamous Atlanta Ripper. 7. Kelsey Quail. 28-year-old Kelsey Quail worked at a dentist's office in Clayton County, Georgia, but hoped to eventually follow her passions and become a model. Sadly, her dreams were cut short in 2018 when she got into a head-on collision during her regular morning drive to work. Police initially thought she died in the crash, but they soon found a bullet wound in her head, leading to some serious questions about what or who was responsible for Quail's accident. She was rushed to the hospital, where it was determined she was brain dead. When it became clear that Kelsey's condition wasn't going to improve, her family made the painful decision to take her off of life support. The tragedy was classified as a homicide as authorities tried to piece together what happened to the young woman. But they had little to go on when determining who shot Quail, why, or if she was even the intended target when the bullet fatally struck her. Investigators released a 14-second clip of a disgruntled motorist who was seen in the area about the same time the car accident happened, but it's unclear whether anything came out of it. The footage led detectives to believe the shooting was either random or that Kelsey was at least not the bullet's intended target. Quail's family told NBC News that they couldn't imagine anyone that might have wanted her dead. They said Kelsey had no known enemies and were left with more questions than theories about what possibly happened in those fateful moments leading up to the homicide. 6. Bow Wow and Leslie Holden. Teen rapper Bow Wow fell off in terms of popularity after his hit debut in the early 2000s. But he graced headlines once again in 2019 for reasons other than his talent, when he and his girlfriend at the time, Kiyomi Leslie Holden, were caught on camera having an argument inside an elevator. Police were called to an address during the early morning one Saturday after receiving reports over the altercation. They discovered that both parties had sustained minor injuries during the spat, but were unable to determine who the main aggressor was, so they charged Bow Wow, whose real name is Shad Moss, and his girlfriend with battery. The couple accused each other of starting it, and as you can probably guess, it often boils down to one person's word against the others in these type of cases. So in one sense, it seems fair that the police held them both equally accountable. After all, it takes two to tango, as the saying goes. But it's also unfortunate if one party is actually more guilty than the other. Bow Wow's lawyer told the press that 2 witnesses supported his version of the events. Both suspects were booked into the Fulton County Jail on an $8,000 bond. Shortly after the arrests, surveillance footage of the fight was released by TMZ. The clip appears to show Bow Wow acting aggressively toward Holden and berating her, which calls his attorney's claims of innocence into question. At one point, he can be seen grabbing Holden's arm, ripping something out from her hand, and cornering her inside the elevator. The couple, who were in town for the Super Bowl at the time, later confirmed to authorities that the argument started after Bow Wow allegedly caught Holden speaking with another guy at a party they attended. 5. Alfred Megbuluba. 28-year-old cocktail mixologist Catherine Kahn died tragically late last year after reportedly being shoved out of a moving Lamborghini and struck by another car in Atlanta. Authorities were quick to issue an arrest warrant for the Lamborghini driver, 31-year-old Alfred Megbuluba. Luckily, the man turned himself in hours after the incident. Inside the luxury car, police found Catherine's wallet, which held her cash and credit cards. The arrest warrant accused Megbuluba of trying to use one of the cards at a gas station shortly before the victim's death. In a statement to news station 11 Alive, Megbuluba's attorney, Steve Sato, described the incident as a simple tragedy no one could have predicted and maintained his client's innocence. Sato claimed Khan was intoxicated and either fell or jumped out of the vehicle all on her own. Megbuluba's case is still ongoing. He faces charges of felony murder, theft by taking, and theft by credit card use. We'll have to wait and see what happens to him. 4. Kelly Gissendaner. On February 7, 1997, Gregory Bruce Owen waited outside the home of his secret lover, Kelly Gissendaner, and her husband Douglas in Auburn, Georgia. When Douglas came home, Owen forced him into his car by knife point and drove him into a secluded wooded area, where he hit Owen in the head and stabbed him in the neck and back multiple times. Kelly arrived at the scene just moments later and helped Owen set her husband's car on fire. The couple then hid Douglas's body in the forest. It wasn't long before authorities identified Kelly and Owen as their primary suspects in the murder case. They offered Kelly a plea deal that involved life in prison with a minimum of 25 years. But she turned the offer down. In 1998, she was convicted of orchestrating Douglas's murder and was then sentenced to death. Owen helped the prosecution secure her conviction by testifying against her as part of his own plea deal, in exchange for only a life sentence instead of the death penalty. He told the court that Kelly thought killing her husband was the only way to get Douglas out of her life without losing out on his life insurance money or their home. She asked for Owen's help 3 months before the crime. Even after she was arrested, Kelly went out of her way to try covering her tracks. She adamantly maintained her innocence through questioning and even tried paying a witness to lie on the stand for her. But she finally admitted to the crime once she was on death row, and in the minutes leading up to her execution on September 30th, 2015. Kelly was the first woman to be executed in the state of Georgia after roughly 70 years, and one of just a handful of convicts that have been put to death for masterminding, but not actually committing a murder. 3. Jazz and Taz Whitehead. Nikki Whitehead was just 17 years old when she gave birth to 2 beautiful twin girls, Jazz Maya and Taz Maya, in 1993. Given her young age, the young mother wasn't a constant presence in her daughters' lives, so her family helped out more with raising them. The girls lived with their great-grandmother while Nikki focused on getting her life put together. In 2007, she got custody of Jazz and Taz and moved them into the home she shared with her truck driver boyfriend in Conyers, Georgia. During the time they lived at their great-grandmother's, the sisters went from being straight-A students to cutting class and dating older guys. To some extent, this kind of behavior can be expected from girls while they're entering their teens. But Nikki didn't want her daughters to follow in her footsteps. She wanted Jazz and Taz to have a better life, so she gave them strict rules out of love. But this soon led to clashes between Nikki and her children, and the fights sometimes got physical. Jazz and Taz returned to their great-grandmothers again after the altercations until 2010. But Nikki continued to fight for them and regained full custody that year. Just 8 days after the twins moved back, their mom was found brutally murdered in the bathtub. Someone had hit her with a vase and stabbed her over 80 times. Nikki's whole house was covered in blood. Jazz and Taz tried blaming Nikki's boyfriend, Robert, for the crime, but a DNA test quickly ruled him out as a suspect. In the meantime, investigators noticed the sisters didn't seem upset about losing their mother, and their stories didn't exactly add up either. Soon enough, the girls were getting caught up in their own lies, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge them in connection to Nikki's murder, so they returned to their great-grandmother's house and continued living like nothing had happened. Months later, a mold of Nikki's teeth were matched to a bite mark on one of the twins. The girls were charged with murder and ultimately took plea deals in exchange for a 30-year sentence. As a condition of their deals, Jazz and Taz had to admit aloud to killing their mother. They revealed that they had spent quite some time plotting the murder before doing it, and they had even kept a journal dedicated to how much they hated Nikki and wanted her to die. Nikki only wanted the best for her daughters, and she paid for it with her life one morning after telling Jazz and Taz to get out of bed. This small motherly act angered them enough to act on their long-awaited desire to kill. 2. The Alday murders. In 1973, inmates Carl Isaacs, Wayne Coleman, and George Dungy escaped from a penitentiary in Maryland through a stray bathroom window. The men hid in the forest before stealing a car they found and heading south. Along the way, they picked up Carl's younger brother Billy to join them. They hoped to eventually make it to Florida or pass the border to Mexico, but ran short on gas and money. So, like the felons they were, they committed a string of robberies in hopes of coming up with the means to reach their destination. After 9 days on the run, the convicts ended up near the small city of Donaldsonville, Georgia. They saw a gas pump on the family-owned Alday farm in Seminole County and started stealing fuel. Ned Alday and his son Jesse caught the group in the middle of the act. The criminals held the men at gunpoint inside their trailer and then shot them to death. As more family members came to the gas pump to get fuel, the fugitives murdered them each one by one. Altogether, they killed 6 people. A neighbor stumbled upon the crime scene several days later when they found the remains of Mary, the one family member who wasn't killed at the scene, but was held for a short while before getting assaulted and then murdered in a nearby wooded area. The men were eventually captured by law enforcement with the help of 2 witnesses that had seen them shortly after the murders. Mastermind Carl Isaacs was executed by lethal injection in 2003. Carl Dungy died in prison, while Billy Isaacs managed to negotiate a 20-year sentence and died a free man after serving time. Wayne Coleman is still alive and is serving out a life sentence. 1. Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore. The murdered remains of 23-year-old Timothy Coggins were found in 1983 near the town of Sunnyside, Georgia. Someone had beaten and stabbed the young African-American man before dragging his body behind a vehicle and leaving him there to rot. It was an obvious hate crime. The killers had carved an X into Timothy's chest to represent the Confederate flag and left his body beneath a giant oak that was nicknamed the Hanging Tree by locals. Detectives learned that Timothy had been at a bar the night he was killed, and that some white men came inside looking for him. He went outside with them and was never seen alive again. After his body was found, police spent 2 weeks investigating before deciding they had hit too many dead ends with no more leads to look into. the case remained cold for 34 years, until an agent from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Jared Coleman, was assigned to reopen the case and look into things. He quickly identified two suspects who had been briefly investigated decades earlier, and found enough evidence to arrest Frank Gebhardt and one of his in-laws, William Moore, for the crime. The prosecution accused the men of being angry at Timothy for dating a white woman at a time when interracial dating was not only frowned upon, but dangerous for a young black man to do. Even worse, the woman Timothy was seen dancing with was involved in a casual relationship with Gebhardt back then, according to Assistant District Attorney Mary G. Broder. Finally, in 2018, long-awaited justice was served. Gebhardt was convicted of Timothy's murder and sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison, and 58-year-old Moore took a plea deal that came with a 20-year sentence, which could very well be the rest of his life, given his age. Thanks for watching. Have you ever been to Georgia? Have any good stories? Let me know in the comments below.